Right in the middle of my son's funeral, when the scent of incense still hung heavy in the air and the white wreaths hadn't even begun to wilt, my daughter-in-law, Raven Coley, looked me straight in the eye and said coldly, "Tomorrow, you need to get out of this house. This is no longer your place." In front of relatives and mourners, I swallowed my tears, bit down on my lip, and chose silence. I didn't want to turn the final farewell to my only son into a humiliating argument. I just wanted Malcolm to rest in peace, at least on his last day. But later, at the will reading, Raven smirked with contempt, tilted her head at me and said, "Hope you enjoy being homeless, because you're not getting anything." Yet it was the very moment the lawyer opened that envelope that karma began to find its way to her. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is a mark on this journey. And if this story touches you, don't forget to like it so it can reach even farther. Because what happened in the will reading room that day was only the beginning. In the next part, I'll tell you exactly what Malcolm prepared for his mother and why just a single piece of paper and a small key were powerful enough to overturn everything Raven thought she had secured. Don't go anywhere. I am Odessa Green, 68 years old, a black mother who has endured far too much loss in her life. But I never imagined there would come a day when pain would strike me this hard. My husband passed away more than 10 years ago from lung cancer, leaving me alone with our only son, Malcolm. During those years, I lived almost entirely off his presence, his breath. Malcolm was a talented architectural engineer working for a major design firm in Baltimore. He came home late every night, yet the first thing he always did when stepping into the kitchen was wrap an arm around my shoulders and ask, "Mom, have you eaten?" That was my Malcolm, a son who truly loved his mother. After my husband died, I sold our old house in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, the place where we had lived for nearly 30 years, and moved to Baltimore to be closer to Malcolm. When he married Raven, and the two of them decided to buy a house in the Park Heights area of Baltimore, I withdrew $40,000 from the money I earned from selling the old house to help with the down payment. At the time, Malcolm held my hands and said, "Mom, consider this your investment in my future. Later, if you ever want a place of your own, I'll help you." I trusted my son. And to be honest, I didn't care much about paperwork or contracts. To me, this was family, and family didn't need black and white signatures to prove anything. When I moved in with Malcolm and Raven in that beautiful 3-story house, I tried my best not to become a burden. I cooked dinner every day. Southern-style fried chicken, red bean rice, cornbread. The dishes Malcolm had loved since childhood. I gardened, planting tomatoes and mint in the backyard. I picked up my grandson from school every afternoon. I cleaned the house, contributed to living expenses, and saw all of it as my way of keeping the family close. But all of those efforts slowly turned into excuses for Raven to find my weaknesses and quietly turn me into an outsider in the very home I helped build. At first I didn't notice. Raven was skilled. In front of me, she always smiled, called me Mom, asked about my health. But the small signs began to appear. The annoyed side glances when I sat watching TV in the living room, the comments that sounded harmless but carried thorns. "Oh, you're cooking this again? We've had this so many times already." Once Malcolm defended me. "What are you talking about? Mom cooks wonderfully." Raven only smiled, brushed her husband's arm, and gently replied, "You misunderstood me. I just think we should switch up our taste a little." Moments like that made me question myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was I overthinking? If you've ever lived with your children, with a daughter-in-law or son-in-law, and started to feel like you've become an extra piece of furniture in your own family, listen closely now. Because for me, things didn't fall apart in a single day. They cracked slowly, quietly, in ways just like this. There were nights when I jolted awake at 2 a.m, hearing Raven's voice spilling out of their bedroom, sharp, irritated. "Do you even understand how I feel? I have no privacy in my own house. How am I supposed to live like this with your mother here forever?" I lay still in my bed, heart pounding, trying to breathe as quietly as possible so no one would know I was awake. I heard Malcolm's voice, lower, softer, clearly trying to calm her. "Baby, she's my mother. She won't be here forever. It's just temporary." "Temporary?" Raven's voice rose. "It's been 2 years, Malcolm." I didn't hear the rest. I only know that I lay there in the dark, tears soaking my pillow, not daring to make a sound. The next morning, I tried to act as if I had heard nothing. I woke up early, made breakfast, fried eggs, bacon, toast. Malcolm came down looking tired, but still smiled at me. "Mom, you're up early?" "Yeah, I couldn't sleep," I said, avoiding his eyes. Raven came down afterward, wearing a pink yoga outfit, hair tied high, face cold as stone. She opened the fridge, grabbed a smoothie, and walked straight out the door without saying a word to me. Malcolm watched her go, then looked back at me with eyes that seemed to apologize. But he didn't say anything. And I also said nothing. That was how we lived together in that house. Intense silence, with words swallowed whole, with tiny cracks widening every day while none of us dared to speak their names. But there was one thing I didn't know back then. Malcolm saw everything. He wasn't blind. He understood exactly who his wife truly was, and he had quietly begun preparing a path to protect me. The only problem was, time was not on our side. Malcolm died on March 17th last year, suddenly from a heart attack at only 46. I still remember the moment I received the news, as if it were carved into my bones. That day, I was in the garden tending to the newly planted tomato seedlings. The March sunlight in Baltimore was still chilly, but I loved the feeling of damp soil beneath my hands. I was bending down, trimming leaves, when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Is this Mrs. Odessa Green?" A young woman's voice, serious, cautious. "Yes, this is she." "Are you the mother of Malcolm Green?" My heart tightened. I stood up straight, my hands still covered in soil. "Yes. What's going on?" "Mrs. Green, I'm calling to inform you. Malcolm was brought to Johns Hopkins Hospital. He had a heart attack while at work. You should come immediately." I don't remember how I got into the car. I don't remember which streets I drove through. I only remember my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel, and my mouth whispering over and over, "Baby, don't leave me. Please don't leave me." When I reached the hospital, Raven was already there. She stood outside the emergency room, pale but dry-eyed, not a single tear on her face. She looked at me with a hollow expression. "Malcolm, my son, how is he?" I could barely breathe. Raven simply shook her head. "They're trying." But 20 minutes later, the doctor came out, removed his glasses, his face heavy with sorrow. "Mrs. Green, we're very sorry." Those 3 words struck my chest like a hammer. My son, the child I had held in my arms for 46 years, the man whose every step I had watched from preschool to his career as an engineer, was gone. I don't know how I cried. I only remember my knees giving out, a nurse catching me before I collapsed. Someone handed me a glass of water, but I couldn't swallow. I just sat there, face in my hands, trembling. While I was drowning in a grief that felt like my chest had been torn open, I heard Raven on the phone. "He didn't make it. I'm at the hospital. Can you come pick me up?" Her voice was calm, smooth. No tremble, no break. Back then, I thought Raven was in shock. People react differently to loss. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe my daughter-in-law still had a heart. I was wrong. If you've ever lost someone you love, you know the feeling. Your legs turning to mud while the world spins around you, ready to collapse. And if this story reminds you of someone, leave a dove in their memory. Because from here, the story gets heavier, darker, and the truth begins to show its face. Malcolm's funeral was held at March Funeral Home on Wabash Avenue, an elegant place with tall white columns, polished marble floors, and rows of red velvet chairs. Raven arranged everything. White flowers covered the room, lilies, white roses, hydrangeas. The scent of incense was suffocating. Hymns played softly, mournfully. Hundreds of people came, colleagues, old college friends, distant relatives. I stood beside the casket, looking down at my son's peaceful face. Malcolm wore a gray suit, the one he often wore to work. His hands were folded across his chest, his expression serene, as if he were simply sleeping. But I knew he would never wake again. I leaned down, gently stroked his cheek, and whispered, "Baby, I'm sorry. I never got to tell you how much I love you." I didn't know Raven was standing behind me. Didn't know she was watching me with eyes cold and sharp as a blade. The ceremony was solemn. The pastor from New Psalmist Baptist Church prayed. Malcolm's co-workers shared loving memories. Everyone said he was kind, talented, devoted to his family. Raven sat in the front row, wearing a long black dress, lightly curled hair. Subtle makeup, tears falling at perfect moments. Whenever someone came to comfort her, she clung to them and sobbed louder, making everyone believe grief was crushing her heart. To anyone watching, Raven looked like the perfect grieving widow. But I knew those tears weren't for Malcolm. I remembered her icy expression the night before, when she ordered me out of my own son's house. Just hours apart, yet it was as if she were two different people, one Raven in public, the devastated wife, one Raven behind closed doors, calculating and ruthless. When the ceremony ended, people began to leave. They hugged me, patted my shoulder, offered the familiar phrases. He was so young. "You have to stay strong." I nodded politely. But deep inside, I knew I was merely playing the role of the composed mother, while the main stage belonged to Raven. Then, among the white flowers, I heard Raven whispering to Tyrone, her voice low, but every word sharp and clear. "The life insurance will cover 2 years of debt. After that, I'll manage. And that old woman, she'll know to leave on her own. I'm not obligated to support anyone else." I froze. My hands shook violently. My heart dropped like a stone. Right there at her husband's funeral, with Malcolm's body not even buried yet, Raven was already calculating money, the future, and my place in it. I wasn't in her plans. I forced myself to stay calm, not to create a scene. Malcolm deserved a peaceful farewell, not a spectacle of his mother and wife fighting. I swallowed the pain, stepped away from the crowd, and found a seat far from curious eyes. Under the warm, golden lights of the funeral home, I watched Raven walk up to the podium and read her eulogy in a trembling voice. She spoke of the wonderful husband, of unfinished dreams, bringing the entire room to tears. I just sat there, hurting, furious, and strangely calm, because only I knew it was all an act. And only I knew that inside my purse, there was something Raven didn't expect. The silver key Malcolm had given me. The first sign that my son had not been blind. He had prepared something for his mother. When the ceremony ended, I caught the pitying looks, as if I were an old mother surviving off her daughter-in-law's generosity. They didn't know Raven had stolen my home. I left the funeral home before my tears could fall. In the hallway, I saw Raven standing close beside Tyrone, whispering something, then glancing my way. When she noticed me watching, she quickly wiped her eyes and leaned on Tyrone's shoulder, as if she had just endured the greatest sorrow of her life. In that moment, I understood more clearly than ever. To Raven, I was nothing but an expense to eliminate, a burden standing between her and the insurance money. I pulled my coat tight and stepped outside. The cold wind slapped my face, but it was nothing compared to the growing chill inside me. Yet even in all that pain, there was a tiny glimmer of hope. Malcolm had not abandoned me. My son had prepared something for me, and this key was the beginning of every answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the small bed in the room Malcolm once said to me, "Mom, stay here as long as you like. Think of it as your home." But now, this room no longer belonged to me. It no longer belonged to the mornings when I made coffee for my son, or the nights when I lulled my grandson to sleep. Soon, Raven would turn it into a gym, just like she'd told Tyrone. I opened the drawer and took out the silver key Malcolm had given me a few weeks before he died. That day we were sitting in the kitchen. Raven had gone out to get her nails done. My grandson was at school. It was just me and my son. Malcolm made me a cup of hot tea, then quietly placed the key on the table. "Keep this, Mom. Don't tell anyone. One day you'll understand." There was something different in his eyes, a deep sadness he was trying to hide. I asked softly, "Are you okay, son?" Malcolm smiled, but that smile never reached his eyes. "Don't worry, Mom. I just want to make sure you're always protected." I didn't understand at the time, but today, after Raven threw me out of the house, I knew this key was my last ray of hope. If you're still watching up to this point, leave a key icon so I know you're still walking this journey with me. From this moment on, everything in my life begins to shift, and Malcolm's message will unlock a secret Raven never saw coming. I started packing my things into 4 large suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes. Every time I folded a shirt, I remembered the years I spent washing, cooking, taking care of this family without ever receiving a word of gratitude. Each time my eyes landed on a photo of Malcolm smiling, my heart shattered a little more. I wrapped each picture in a soft cloth, whispering, "Baby, I won't let anyone smear what I've done for you, or the love I have for you." As I was crouched down packing, I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Right at 10 p.m., Raven stood in the doorway, arms crossed, tapping her nails against the doorframe, and said in a contemptuous tone, "Don't expect me to change my mind. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, I want you out of here. I've put up with you long enough." I looked straight into her eyes. I didn't answer back. I just nodded. And in that moment, I felt something I'd never felt before. I would never again let anyone trample on my dignity. Raven walked away. I continued packing under the weak yellow light. My hands trembled as they touched each item. The towel Malcolm gave me for my birthday, the family photo album, the winter sweater I had knitted for my son. I opened the wardrobe. A gray suit jacket fell out, the one Malcolm wore on his college graduation day. I hugged it to my chest and burst into tears. My son's scent, a faint cologne, and the subtle smell of architectural paper still lingered. "Baby, I'm sorry I couldn't protect your home, but I promise I won't let them win." My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Heard you're moving out? Good for everyone." I checked the number. Tyrone. Raven had told him, and I knew they were smiling behind my back. I didn't reply. I just turned off the phone and kept packing. At 4 a.m., I left that house. 4 suitcases in the trunk, 1 cardboard box on the back seat, the silver key in my coat pocket. I drove out of that quiet neighborhood, the place where I had once walked my grandson to school, where I had once cooked dinner for the whole family. No one knew that the woman who had taken care of so many families in Baltimore was silently leaving like a homeless stray. I stopped at the Harbor City Inn on Pulaski Highway, a roadside motel, its red neon sign flickering tiredly in the night. The room was small, smelling strongly of bleach, the bedsheet wrinkled, but I knew this was only temporary. I reached into my coat pocket and took out the envelope Malcolm had left. Inside was the business card of attorney Langston Price and a handwritten note. "Mom, if one day I'm no longer here, please go see Mr. Langston. I've arranged everything." I broke down in tears, not only because of the pain, but because I realized Malcolm had seen everything. He had known, and he had quietly carved out a path for his mother to survive. I sat by the motel window, watching car lights sweep through the darkness. A small flame, but a clear one, flared up inside me. I was no longer the mother thrown out of her home. I was the one holding the key, and I knew the real game was only just beginning. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtain, scattering uneven streaks of light across the damp, moldy wall. I woke up after a night of barely any sleep. My body ached, but my mind was sharp, almost cold. I washed my face with cold water from the rusty faucet, then went down to the lobby to make a cup of instant coffee from the vending machine. The bitter taste slid down my throat and made me shiver, but at least it woke me up. I went back to the small room, sat at the wobbly wooden desk, and took out the envelope Malcolm had left. His handwriting, bold, familiar, made my hands tremble. "Mom, please go see Mr. Langston Price." Underneath were the phone number and the address of his law office. I ran my fingers over each stroke of ink as if I were touching my son's hand. All morning, I just sat there, my finger resting on the numbers, but not dialing. Partly because I needed to calm down, partly because I understood. The moment I made that call, nothing would ever be the same again. I had to be ready. Not as a frail, helpless old mother, but as a woman preparing to stand up and defend her own existence. By late afternoon, the phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello, this is Langston Price, the attorney handling Malcolm Hartley's legal matters. First of all, please accept my deepest condolences." My throat tightened. It took me a while to speak. "Thank you. Malcolm mentioned you. My son trusted you very much." His voice softened. "That's right. Before he passed away, Malcolm left some documents and instructed me to contact you. We should arrange a meeting to clarify a codicil to the will. Would you be able to come to my office next Tuesday at 2 p.m.? I nodded slightly, knowing he couldn't see me. "Yes, I'll be there." When the call ended, I put the phone down. Inside my chest, fear and hope wove together like two crashing currents. Malcolm had not abandoned me. My son had seen everything in advance. He had prepared a path for me, a place Raven could never touch. I looked up at the smoke-stained ceiling, and it seemed a little brighter, as if Malcolm's eyes were watching over me. That night, I opened an old notebook and wrote as if I were talking to him. "Malcolm, today I received a call from Mr. Price. You prepared more than I ever imagined. I promise I won't let you down. I will stand tall, and I will let the world see that you were right to believe in me." I closed the notebook and tucked it under my pillow. Outside the window, car lights swept through the night like a heartbeat urging me forward. I knew. The day of confrontation was drawing near. 2 days later, the phone rang again. This time, Raven's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was sweet enough to make my skin crawl. "Odessa, I just wanted to make sure you're not planning to cause trouble. We're still family, right? I think you should stay quiet. Silence is best for everyone. Otherwise, no one will believe you." I took a deep breath. "Raven, I don't want to make noise. I just want Malcolm to rest in peace. But remember this clearly. I won't let anyone trample on me anymore." A soft, bitter laugh echoed down the line. "And what exactly do you think you can do? People only see a spiteful old woman. You should disappear like you should have from the beginning." I didn't say another word. I let her finish, then hung up. After that, I opened the drawer. The voice recorder lay still inside. I stared at it for a long time. I knew that, if necessary, I had enough evidence to protect myself. In the days that followed, I lived in tension, but no longer in trembling fear. Every morning, I put on my old coat and walked to the convenience store near the motel to buy a hot cup of coffee. I sat in the corner, watched the light filter through the window, and felt my body slowly steady itself. I knew, by next Tuesday, my life would veer in a different direction. In those quiet minutes, I thought about Raven. Maybe right now she felt secure, thinking I had been pushed to the edge, She didn't know her own cruel words had been recorded. She didn't know the signature she forced onto that document wasn't valid. And most importantly, she didn't know what Malcolm had left for me. I clenched the silver key in my hand. A new chapter was about to begin, and this time, I would not be the passive one. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtain, scattering uneven streaks of light across the damp, mold-stained wall. I woke after a night of almost no sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind was clear, coldly clear. I washed my face with cold water from the rusty faucet, then went down to the lobby to make a cup of instant coffee from the vending machine. The bitter taste slid down my throat and made me shiver, but at least it woke me up. I returned to the small room, sat at the wobbly wooden desk, and took out the envelope Malcolm had left. His handwriting, bold, familiar, made my hands tremble. "Mom, please go see Mr. Langston Price." Below it were the phone number and the address of the law office. I traced each stroke of ink as if I were touching my son's hand. I sat like that the entire morning, my finger resting on the numbers, but not dialing. Part of me needed to calm down. Part of me understood that once I made that call, nothing would ever return to the way it was. I had to be ready, not as a frail, weak old mother, but as a woman preparing to stand up and defend her own existence. By late afternoon, the phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello, this is Langston Price, the attorney handling Malcolm Hartley's legal matters. First, please accept my deepest condolences." My throat tightened. It took me a long moment before I could speak. "Thank you. Malcolm mentioned you. My son trusted you very much." His voice softened. "That's right. Before he passed, Malcolm left some documents and instructed me to contact you. We should arrange a meeting to clarify a codicil to the will. Would you be able to come to my office next Tuesday at 2 p.m.? I nodded lightly, even though I knew he couldn't see me. "Yes, I'll be there." When the call ended, I placed the phone down. Inside my chest, fear and hope braided together like two rushing currents. Malcolm had not abandoned me. My son had foreseen everything. He had prepared a path for me, a place Raven could never reach. I looked up at the smoke-stained ceiling, and it seemed a little brighter, as if Malcolm's eyes were watching over me. That night, I opened an old notebook and wrote as if speaking to him. "Malcolm, today I received a call from Mr. Price. You prepared more than I imagined. I promise I won't let you down. I will stand tall, and I will show the world that you were right to believe in me." I closed the notebook and tucked it under my pillow. Outside the window, the sweep of passing headlights cut through the night like a beating pulse urging me forward. I knew the day of confrontation was drawing near. 2 days later, the phone rang again. This time, Raven's name lit up the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was sweet enough to make my skin crawl. "Odessa, I just want to make sure you're not planning to cause trouble. We're still family, right? I think you should stay quiet. Silence is best for everyone. Otherwise, no one will believe you." I drew in a long breath. "Raven, I don't want to make noise. I just want Malcolm to rest in peace. But make no mistake, I will not let anyone trample on me anymore." A soft, bitter laugh lilted through the line. "And what exactly do you think you can do?" "People only see a spiteful old woman. You should disappear, just like you should have from the beginning." I didn't say another word. I let her finish, then hung up. Afterward, I opened the drawer. The voice recorder lay still inside. I stared at it for a long time. I knew that, if necessary, I had enough evidence to protect myself. The following days, I lived in tension, but no longer in trembling fear. Every morning, I put on my old coat and walked to the convenience store near the motel to buy a hot cup of coffee. I sat in the corner, watched the light filter through the window, and felt my body slowly settle. I knew. Come next Tuesday, my life would split onto a new path. In those quiet moments, I thought of Raven. Perhaps right now she felt secure, believing I had been pushed to the edge. She didn't know her own cruel words had been recorded. She didn't know the forced signature on that document wasn't valid, and most importantly, she didn't know what Malcolm had left for me. I tightened my grip around the silver key. A new chapter was about to begin, and this time, I would not be the passive one. The appointment with attorney Langston Price came faster than I expected. That entire morning, my heart pounded like someone was beating a drum inside my chest. I chose a neat navy blue dress and a gray cardigan. I wanted to look put together, not to impress anyone, but so that Raven would see I was still Odessa Green, a woman with dignity, not the parasite she once spat at me. The law office was inside a 3-story red brick building in downtown Baltimore. When I arrived, the clock had just struck 1:45 p.m. I sat in the car for a few minutes, breathing deeply, trying to steady my heartbeat. Through the window, I saw a silver BMW pull in, as if afraid of being late. And just as I suspected, Raven stepped out, wearing a tight black dress, her blonde hair curled softly, her makeup flawless. Walking beside her was Tyrone, her brother, dressed in a stiff, overly formal suit. I opened my car door and stepped out. Raven's eyes met mine, a flicker of irritation flashing across her face before her expression hardened like a stone mask. She turned away, no greeting, not even a nod. Tyrone leaned toward her and murmured something, and the two of them strode into the building as if they owned the entire place. I followed behind, gripping the strap of my purse tightly, but keeping my head held high. The receptionist smiled politely and led us into a carpeted waiting room. The silence was so thick I could hear every tick of the wall clock. Raven sat across from me, legs crossed, clutching her designer bag. Every time she lifted her eyes, her gaze was sharp as a blade. I kept my composure, even allowed a faint smile. And that alone was enough to make Raven shift her crossed legs repeatedly in irritation. At exactly 2 p.m., the door opened. Attorney Langston Price entered, a man in his early 60s, silver-haired, tall and slender, with kind eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses. He shook each of our hands, his voice low and solid as stone. "Thank you all for coming. I know this isn't an easy time, but Malcolm left very specific instructions. I will read them exactly as written." We entered his office, a large room with a polished mahogany desk and bookshelves packed with files. The air was thick with tension. I sat across from Raven and Tyrone, feeling as if every breath had to be measured. Langston began reading, and just as I expected, the house, the car, the retirement accounts, the life insurance, everything went to Raven. She nodded nonstop, her lips curving into a triumphant smirk. Each time the lawyer said the word wife, Raven shot me a sideways glance that screamed, "See? You are nothing!" I didn't react. I sat upright, hands resting gently on my lap. I knew the real part had not arrived yet. Then the lawyer paused. The atmosphere shifted. His voice deepened, every word dropping like a stone. 3 months before his passing, Malcolm added an addendum to the will. I will now read it verbatim. Raven stopped nodding. Tyrone lowered his pen. I held my breath. I, Malcolm Green, leave the full contents of safe deposit box number K412 at Chesapeake Federal Bank, along with all documents and accounts contained within, to my mother, Odessa Green, with full and exclusive ownership. A silence so heavy it felt alive filled the room. I could hear my own heartbeat. Raven shot to her feet, slamming her hand onto the desk. "What? No, that's impossible. Malcolm never mentioned any safe deposit box." Attorney Langston remained calm, as if he had expected this outburst. "Ma'am, I personally witnessed Malcolm sign this addendum. He was fully lucid. His medical records confirm it. There is nothing irregular here." Tyrone jumped in. "We demand verification. This could be forged." Langston adjusted his glasses, his gaze firm. "You are entitled to that, but the document is legally valid and has already been filed with the county court. If you choose to contest it, The process will be lengthy and without guarantees. My advice: honor the wishes of the deceased." Raven's face flushed red. I saw her hand trembling, though she tried desperately to appear composed. She turned toward me, her eyes blazing. "You knew about this, didn't you? You told Malcolm to do this." I slowly shook my head. "No, I'm surprised too. Malcolm never mentioned a safe deposit box. But perhaps my son knew who in this family needed protection the most." A short, sharp, hollow laugh burst from Raven's lips. Tyrone squeezed her shoulder, whispering something that made her sink back into her seat. Attorney Langston took out a sealed envelope and slid it toward me. "These are the keys and the authorization documents. The bank will assist you once you present the death certificate. You have full access." I accepted the envelope, my chest heavy, yet my heart warming in the strangest, most profound way. "My boy, now I understand. You never left me alone." Raven glared at the envelope as if she wanted to snatch it out of my hands. Deep in her eyes, I saw fear, not anger, but genuine panic. She knew that inside that box was something she could not control. Maybe money, maybe documents, or perhaps the truth about herself. The meeting ended with tension wound tight like a stretched wire. Raven shot up from her chair, the leg scraping the floor with a harsh screech. She grabbed Tyrone's arm and stormed out. But before leaving, she turned, stared straight at me, and enunciated each word. "Don't think you've won. I won't let this go." The door slammed hard, rattling. Only Attorney Langston and I remained. He looked at me, his voice gentler now. "Mrs. Green, your son was a very thoughtful man. He prepared for every possibility. His only wish was that you would be protected." I couldn't speak, just nodded. 2 tears rolled down my cheeks, not from grief, but from knowing that in his final months, Malcolm still thought of me. Stepping out of the building, the late afternoon breeze slipped beneath my coat, making me shiver. I held the envelope tightly against my chest and walked slowly along the busy sidewalk. Amid all the chaos, loss, and betrayal, one priceless thing remained: my son's silent protection. And I knew this wasn't the end of Raven. She would fight back. She would lash out. But I was no longer the quiet, powerless mother. I had the silver key. I had evidence. And most importantly, I had the trust Malcolm left in my hands. I swore no one would ever take that from me again. 3 days after the will reading, I arrived at Chesapeake Federal Bank on a cold morning. The sky was a solid slab of gray, and the damp April wind slapped against my face, whipping my hair around. I pulled my thick brown coat tighter, holding the envelope and the silver key Mr. Langston had given me, my heart pounding with each step. Not out of fear, but because I knew, behind that steel door lay the truth Malcolm had prepared for me long ago. The bank was crowded, the sound of heels echoing sharply across the marble floor. I approached the counter and handed over all the documents. The banker, a middle-aged woman named Sharon McKee, looked up at me with warm, understanding eyes. "Mrs. Odessa Green, correct?" she asked gently. "We've been informed. Please follow me." I nodded and followed Sharon through multiple layers of security doors. The hallway grew dimmer as we descended to the lower floor, where the safe deposit boxes were kept. We stopped before a thick gray door secured with an electronic lock. Sharon swiped her access card, then used the master key. Then it was my turn. My hand trembled slightly as I inserted the silver key, turning it once. A cold, crisp click. The door slowly opened, revealing a room lit by stark fluorescent lights. Box K412 sat on the 3rd row. Long, heavy, sharp-edged. I had to use both hands to pull it from the compartment. When I placed the cold metal box onto the table, I hesitated. Sharon rested a gentle hand on my shoulder and smiled. "Take your time. I'll wait outside." The door closed. It was just me, the box, and the truth. I sat down, took a deep breath, and turned the key. Inside, the first thing I saw was a brown envelope. On it, for Mom. I opened it with trembling hands, and as I read, it felt like Malcolm was sitting right beside me. Mom, if you're holding this, then the thing I feared most has happened. I'm sorry I can't be there to protect you, but I've prepared things so you will never be left behind. You deserve peace. No one has the right to throw you out. I love you so much. Malcolm. Tears fell onto the letter, smudging the ink. I wiped them quickly. I couldn't lose even a single word my son left for me. Beneath the letter was a neatly arranged stack of documents. Bank statements, stock certificates, investment files, financial agreements accumulated over time. It took me a few seconds to comprehend the number before me, nearly $200,000, all in my name. Malcolm had taken the $40,000 I gave him years ago and quietly invested it, growing it over time. He had anticipated that I would one day need it, but that wasn't the part that hurt the most. In the corner of the box was a separate file, its cover marked in red ink. Evidence file. I opened it and felt my breath stop. Text messages, emails, screenshots, all printed, sorted, documented. The first line hit me like a slap. She just needs to hurry up and die and leave her pension behind. I'll find a legal way to get it. From Raven to Tyrone, 1 year ago. My hand dropped onto the table, but I kept reading. There were messages of Raven discussing how to manipulate Malcolm, inventing lies that I was a burden. Messages where she urged Malcolm to pressure me for more contributions, even though he was the one paying the mortgage. Receipts of luxury shopping on the exact days she claimed they didn't have enough money for groceries. Each page was a stab, each line a truth I once never dared imagine. Malcolm had known. He had seen everything, and he had quietly gathered evidence for me. At the very bottom was a photograph, Malcolm and me on his college graduation day, his face radiant with pride. On the back he wrote, "Mom, you're the reason I made it here. Never forget that." I pressed the photo to my chest. For years I thought Malcolm had drifted away because of Raven, but no, he never let go of me. He had simply been preparing for the worst. When I left the bank, the documents were secured tightly in my bag. Sharon walked me to the exit, her eyes filled with sincerity. "Mrs. Green, I met Malcolm a few times when he came here. He always talked about you. I believe he loved you more than you realize." All I could whisper was, "Thank you." As I drove back to the motel, my phone rang. Raven. I froze. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I answered. Her voice was sweet, like sugar glazed over fear. "Odessa, are you free today? I think we should talk. I made roasted chicken, your favorite." I pressed my lips together, keeping my voice calm. "All right, I'll come by." She wasn't inviting me out of kindness. She had heard whispers about the safe deposit box. She wanted to know what I knew. But this time, I was not empty-handed. I had the truth. I had the evidence. I had the money Malcolm prepared. I had my son's final shield. The meeting ahead would be our first face-off since the will reading. And this time, I was not coming to endure. I drove slowly, sunlight flickering across the windshield. Inside me, a quiet resolve was taking shape. "Malcolm," I whispered, "I found my weapon, and I will use it when the time is right, to protect your honor and to ensure the truth never gets buried." The lunch meeting with Raven fell on a bright, breezy noon. Sunlight streamed through my windshield so intensely that I had to pull the sun visor down. I drove my old car with a knot of mixed emotions tightening in my chest. From the moment I stepped out of the bank, I already knew. Her invitation wasn't about family, it was just another trap. But this time, I was ready. Raven's house sat on a quiet suburban street in Park Heights. It was still the place where I had lived for 2 years. But as I pulled over and looked up at the house, it suddenly felt uncomfortably unfamiliar, like I was just a passerby. The door opened. Raven stood there in a flawless white dress, smiling warmly as if nothing had ever happened. "Odessa, you're here. I'm really glad," she said, her voice sweet as honey, but her eyes cold as ice. I nodded slightly, carrying a small gift bag. Inside was a picture frame I had chosen with intention. A photo of Malcolm on his graduation day, his face glowing with pride beneath his cap and gown. I was certain Raven had never seen this picture, because back then she wasn't yet in my son's life. Stepping inside, I paused at the threshold of the dining room. The room gleamed like a staged photo shoot. A white tablecloth draped perfectly over the table, a vase of red roses at the center. Gold-rimmed plates set with precision. Roast chicken, salad, white wine, everything looked like props for a carefully rehearsed performance. "Please sit, Mom," Raven said, pulling out a chair like the picture-perfect daughter-in-law. If I hadn't known her true nature, I might have believed she genuinely wanted peace. I placed the gift bag on the table and smiled. "I brought something small for you. I thought you should have it." Raven tilted her head, unwrapped the gift, and when she saw Malcolm in his graduation outfit, beaming, proud, her expression softened for just a split second. Then the fake smile returned instantly. "It's a nice photo. Thank you, Mom," she said, setting the frame aside. I noted how she didn't even handle it gently, just pushed it to the edge of the table like an unnecessary prop. We sat. Raven poured wine and handed me a glass. "To Malcolm," she said, raising her glass with a theatrically emotional tone. I tapped my glass lightly, sipped, and silently reminded myself, "Stay calm, observe, don't rush." Lunch drifted along with meaningless small talk. Raven complained about house renovations, rising costs, bills piling up. I listened, nodded, but offered nothing more. I knew she was preparing the stage, slowly steering the conversation toward what she really cared about. I let her talk. The more she believed I was pliable, the more she'd trap herself. Finally, after tiptoeing around various topics, Raven set her utensils down and rested her chin on her hand, the corner of her mouth lifting. "Odessa, I know you went to the bank. I'm not stupid." She looked me dead in the eye, lowering her voice a notch. "So, what did you find in that box?" I looked up, feigning obliviousness. "Oh, nothing much. Just a few old photos, some keepsakes. You know how sentimental Malcolm was." Raven narrowed her eyes. I caught a quick flash of suspicion, then she masked it with a thin smile. "Really? I figured there'd be something more valuable. Malcolm wouldn't keep an entire safe deposit box just for photos." I shrugged lightly, appearing indifferent. At that moment, I placed a black pen gently on the table beside my glass. It wasn't a normal pen. It was the mini voice recorder I bought after capturing Raven's cruel words the first time. One press on the tip, and everything said at that dining table would be preserved. And I had just activated it. Raven poured herself more wine, took a long sip, and lowered her voice even further. "Odessa, we're both adults. I'll be direct. If you cooperate, I'll share a portion with you. We both know Malcolm left something, and it's better for everyone if we make a private deal. You'll have money for housing, and I won't have to drag this into court. Win-win." I sat still, staring straight into her glossy, artificial eyes. In that instant, behind her makeup and rehearsed expressions, I saw her real face, a person who knew nothing but calculation. That offer wasn't just greed, it was an insult to my dignity. I gave a tiny nod, pretending to waver, my voice a little shaky. "You truly believe Malcolm wanted me to hide what he left behind?" Raven jumped in immediately, as though afraid I might reconsider. "Don't bring Malcolm into this. He's gone. We have to be realistic. If you're smart, you'll work with me. Otherwise, you'll end up with nothing but useless photos." I bent down to pick up the napkin that had slipped onto my lap, hiding the bitter smile tugging at my lips. In my purse, the recorder pen continued working, capturing every word. "If you cooperate, I'll share a portion with you." That sentence echoed in my mind like a noose she had slipped around her own neck. Lunch dragged on with a heavy tension. Raven continued painting an illusion of a mutually beneficial partnership, while I only nodded occasionally, sometimes adding a naive comment here or there, feeding her confidence, letting her believe she was manipulating me. I knew. The more she believed she was winning, the more she would speak, revealing her true intentions. When the meal ended, Raven walked me to the door, her smile switching back to the family mode. "I hope you think seriously about this. I don't want tension between us. Family should stay united." I took her hand, squeezing lightly, and looked her straight in the eyes. "You're right. Family should stay united. And don't worry, I won't forget anything you said today." I turned and walked out, the bag on my arm feeling much heavier, not because of the photo frame, but because of the recorder inside. In my head, Raven's voice replayed, sweet but poisonous. "If you cooperate, I'll share a portion with you." Another piece of evidence, another puzzle piece in the picture I was steadily assembling. When the door closed behind me, I stepped into the sunlight. The noon breeze brushed my cheek. I took a deep breath. With every step I took, I no longer felt like a lonely, powerless mother-in-law. I had Malcolm behind me. I had truth in my hands. And piece by piece, I was turning the entire game around. After that calculated lunch, I didn't rush to avoid Raven. I knew that to corner her completely, I needed one more confrontation, a final, precise strike to rip off the mask she'd been wearing for so long. 3 days later, Raven called me first. Her voice was so soft, it bordered on fake. "Odessa, could you come by the house? I want to show you some papers Malcolm left behind. Maybe we can understand each other better." Her tone was sugar, but the stench of scheming was unmistakable. I agreed immediately because I had my own plan. Raven's living room sparkled as if arranged for a magazine shoot. Fresh flowers, glossy leather sofas, everything was too perfect to be natural. Raven emerged in a striking red dress, her hair softly curled, makeup polished as though she were heading into a critical meeting. I sat down, placed my handbag beside me, folded my arms, and kept my expression perfectly calm. "Thank you for coming," Raven began with a half-smile. "I think we need transparency to avoid misunderstandings. I don't want tension in the family." I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled a printed screenshot from my bag. I placed it gently on the table and slid it toward her. Raven leaned down. Her expression shifted from curiosity to horror in a matter of seconds when she saw the bold letters, "Parasite." "If Malcolm dies, I'll turn her room into a gym like I promised." The message was from her phone to Tyrone. Raven's face turned pale, lips trembling. This isn't mine. Someone faked it." I allowed myself a thin smile, my voice still steady. "Really? Because I have the original on a hard drive. Malcolm saved everything. Timestamps, numbers, screenshots. Now tell me, who do you think the court will believe? A mother with nothing to gain? Or a widow with motives stacked higher than her credit card debt?" The air thickened. Raven's hand trembled as she reached for the paper, but I quickly pulled it back. I kept my gaze locked on hers. "And there's more," I said, taking out a thick stack of pages held neatly together. I dropped it on the table. The thud made Raven flinch. "I wasn't going to show this yet, but maybe you need a reminder. These are your credit card statements. $15,000 in spending during the month Malcolm died. Luxury spas, a New York hotel, designer clothes." I flipped to a marked line. "And here, the exact day you asked me to cook for the funeral. Your card charged nearly $3,000 for a single dress. Is this what you call financial hardship?" Raven froze. Her eyes widened, lips trembling but unable to form a word. I leaned back, my voice softer but razor sharp. "Malcolm saw everything. My son wasn't talkative, but he kept records. Every bill, every message, every insult you whispered behind my back. And now, they're all right here." Raven pressed a hand to her chest. her complexion ashen, like a mask stripped bare. She stuttered, "Odessa, I was under pressure. I was overwhelmed. I needed to relieve stress." I let out a short, dry laugh. Relieve stress using Malcolm's money? With lies? With making a widow into a joke among her friends? Each of my words landed like a hammer on the table, cracking the fragile composure Raven was desperately clinging to. Her fingers clenched so tightly, her knuckles turned white. I knew she was panicking, exactly what I wanted. I leaned in, my voice quiet but cutting. "The most interesting part is that I haven't even shown you the worst evidence. What you've seen is just the surface. Malcolm left much more, enough to rip your reputation into pieces if I choose. But I'm not rushing. I want you to sit with this feeling, to understand you're standing at the edge of a cliff." Silence filled the room. I could hear the wall clock ticking. Raven finally looked up. In her eyes were fear and a flicker of hatred. But this time, I felt no fear in return. I had gone too far to turn back. I stood, adjusted my coat, and spoke calmly. "Thank you for lunch the other day, and thank you for proving Malcolm right, that his mother needed to be prepared." I gathered the documents and slipped them back into my bag. Before leaving the living room, I turned to Raven. "Remember this, Raven, I haven't released anything. But if you ever think about throwing me out again, these papers will speak for me." I walked toward the door. Before closing it behind me, I looked back. "And don't forget, everything you said yesterday and today doesn't disappear. It's in my hands now. You choose how you want to be remembered." The door shut. I left Raven alone in her pristine living room, sitting in shock, her face drained of color. Outside, I took a deep breath. The cold air filled my chest. The documents in my bag weighed heavily, but it was the weight of truth, of power. I knew this battle wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I wasn't the one cornered. And more importantly, I could feel Malcolm standing right behind me.
1 week later, I received an invitation from Raven. She said it was a gathering to remember Malcolm, just a small get-together for close family and friends, or at least that's what she claimed. I held the card in my hand, a strange uneasiness rising inside me. The woman who had kicked her mother-in-law out of the house right after the funeral now wanted to host a memorial? I knew immediately this wasn't about Malcolm. This was another stage for Raven to perform her role as the perfect widow. Still, I decided to go, but this time, I didn't come empty-handed. In my purse lay the folders of documents and the pen recorder, the silent weapons Malcolm had prepared for me. I knew the stage Raven built tonight would be the perfect place for her mask to fall in front of everyone. That evening, I arrived early. The house glowed with bright lights. White flowers lined the walkway, and scented candles filled the living room with a soft, sweet smell. On a long, lace-covered table were framed photos of Malcolm, but almost all of them were Raven's selections. Wedding pictures, vacation photos, images of the two of them smiling brightly together. I looked around and realized, not a single photo of Malcolm with me. Guests began arriving. I sat quietly in a corner, observing. Raven appeared in a long black dress, hair neatly pinned, makeup flawless. She glided around the room with a wine glass in hand, speaking to groups of people, her eyes always glistening, her voice trembling. "Life feels so empty without Malcolm. He was my whole world." Family members nodded, some dabbed their eyes, others patted her shoulder in sympathy. I sat still, like an outsider in a home that once had been mine. But inside, my heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but because I was waiting for the right moment. Midway through the event, Raven stood in the center of the room and raised her glass. Her voice trembled, as if she were struggling to hold back tears. "Thank you all for being here to remember my husband. Malcolm was a wonderful man, and I only hope I can live in a way that honors his love." Applause filled the room. A few relatives whispered praises about her strength and resilience. I shivered, but I knew that in just a few seconds, that admiration would turn into stunned silence. I stood up and spoke calmly. "Excuse me, I have something to share." Every head turned toward me. Raven stiffened for half a second, then quickly spread a wide, gracious smile. "Oh, Odessa, of course. You should say a few words. Everyone knows how much you loved Malcolm." I walked slowly to the center of the room, my hand resting on my purse, where the recorder had already been switched on. I scanned the room, meeting each person's eyes before resting my gaze on Raven. She nodded slightly, as if she were generously giving me the stage. I set the pen on the table. A soft click echoed when I pressed the playback button. Raven's voice filled the room. Crisp, cold, nothing like the weeping woman standing before everyone. "She's just an extra expense. After the funeral, I'm turning her room into a gym. Don't worry, Malcolm is too soft. He'll never stop me." No one said anything. The room fell into absolute silence. I heard a small gasp. A few people's mouths dropped open. Eyes shifted toward Raven, shocked, disbelieving. Whispers began rising like a wave. "Oh my God, she really said that?" During the funeral? While Odessa was still crying for her son? "That's heartless." I didn't say a single word. I just stood there, letting Raven's own voice do what I didn't need to do myself. Raven's face flushed crimson, then drained white. Her lips quivered. She tried to force a weak smile, raising a hand. This must have been edited. Someone is trying to set me up. You have to believe me, I would never." But the family's eyes had changed. An older aunt stepped forward, her voice stern. "Raven, that was your voice. Nobody can fake that mocking little laugh. We heard it clearly." A cousin sighed, shaking his head. "I always thought you were a bit cold. But this, Malcolm deserved better." Raven looked around, searching desperately for someone to defend her, but no one stepped forward. She tried to lift her wine glass, but her hand trembled so hard the wine spilled onto the table. I stepped forward, my voice calm and steady. "No need to raise it. I don't need to prove much. I just want everyone to know Malcolm was never blind. He saw everything, and he protected his mother in his own way. Tonight, I simply let Raven's voice reveal who she really is." The room was silent. The looks that had moments earlier been filled with pity for Raven were now cold, evaluating, recalculating. Gone were the praises of strong widow. What remained were eyes trying to reconstruct the truth about the woman before them. Raven tried to stand tall, but her shoulders trembled, her face ghost white. In the very play she had orchestrated, she became the lone actor without an audience willing to believe her. If you're still listening now, perhaps you know that feeling too. The moment truth stands upright, and every lie can do nothing but bow its head. Don't leave yet. The way everything closed after that night was the most important part of my journey. I returned to my seat, my hand resting on the purse full of documents. I knew I still had stronger blows, pieces of evidence yet unrevealed. But this was enough for tonight. Just one strike was enough to send Raven's perfect mask crashing down in front of the very people she wanted to manipulate. After that night, I never had to face Raven again. She vanished from my life like a shadow pulled out of the light. No more phone calls, no more sweet-voiced threats, no more schemes to throw me out on the street. With the money Malcolm left, I found a small apartment near Druid Hill Park. Just an ordinary place, but the sunlight streamed in every morning, and from the balcony I could watch people walking, children playing. I placed Malcolm's graduation photo on a small wooden shelf beside a lavender plant. Every morning I brewed a cup of coffee, opened the window, and took a deep breath. Breathed like a free person. No more fear, no more being treated like a burden inside my own family. I joined the senior women's group at New Psalmist Baptist Church. We met to read, knit, cook, and share our stories. One day I shared mine, not for pity, but as a reminder. Never think age or loneliness makes you weak. Don't be afraid to stand up. Sometimes a single sheet of paper, a pen, or a tiny recorder is enough to turn an entire life around.
Attorney Langston visited me once, bringing notarized copies of all the evidence, neatly filed. "Mrs. Green," he said, "if she ever bothers you again, we have everything we need, but I think she's learned her lesson." I nodded and smiled. For the first time in many months, it was a full, genuine smile, free of bitterness. I did not lose Malcolm. My son still lives in every decision I make. In every morning I wake up with my head held high. In every moment I remember that I deserve respect. Malcolm gave me more than money or legal protection. He gave me faith that justice, even late, can still arrive. That as long as we hold on to our dignity, no one has the right to turn us into something disposable. Before I end, I want to thank you, the person who stayed with me until the very end of this story. Your presence, wherever you are in the world, makes an old mother like me feel far less alone. Where are you listening from? Leave the name of your city or country in the comments. I truly want to know how far my story has traveled. If this story touched you, please hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe so we can meet again in the next story. Every comment, every view, every bit of empathy you've given me is the greatest gift I could receive at this age. Wherever you are, I hope each of us finds light, finds justice, and most importantly, finds peace within our own heart.